Hello and welcome to our online Abide Women's meeting. It is so nice that we can meet virtually during this time of isolation, and I just also want to say that we as a committee are missing you all so much and missing Tuesday night meeting together, and we look forward to the day when normality is resumed and we can all meet again. But in the meantime, we thought it would be a good idea to continue the final chapter of Ruth in our Bible study series that we have been doing over the year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recap where we've been through in Ruth up to now, and then we're going to head over to Zoom and do a time of discussion on chapter 4. But first I have asked Joanne to read chapter 4 for us, so thank you, Joanne, over to you.
The reading this evening is taken from the book of Ruth and chapter 4. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to her relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here, in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." Then the Redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and to all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from amongst his brothers, and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went in to her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life, and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child, and laid him on her lap, and became his nurse. And the women of the neighbourhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David.
Before we move into a time of discussion on Zoom, I thought I'd just recap from chapter 1 up until now, just to refresh our memories on the book of Ruth, because I know we've been doing it over the past year, and it can be, we can easily forget these things. So let's just give I'll just give a wee quick recap, and then we'll move into a time of discussion. Okay, so chapter 1 starts where we're introduced to Elimelech and Naomi, who are married, and they have 2 sons named Mahlon and Chilion. And there's a famine in Israel. They live in Israel, but there's a famine, so they move to Moab. And while they're in Moab, the 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, marry Ruth and Orpah. So, but unfortunately, during their time there, Naomi doesn't only lose her husband, Elimelech, but also her 2 sons die. So it's a very sad time for Naomi. And Naomi says to her daughter-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, who married her sons, "You stay here. I have heard that the famine has passed in Israel, so I'm actually going to head back up to Israel. But you stay here and stay in Moab while I go." Orpah said, okay, she stayed, but Ruth insisted that she would go with Naomi. And we even read that Ruth says, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried." When Naomi returned, the whole town was stirred because of them. They were all chatting about who it might be. Is that Naomi? And Naomi just said, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara," which means bitter, and she was lamenting. And this chapter then concludes. They were told they arrived at Bethlehem just in time for the barley harvest, and I think that just indicates a little sign of hope moving into chapter 2. Then chapter 2 begins with discussing how they're going to get food. Ruth decides to go out and glean some grain, and it just so happened that she ended up in a field of a man called Boaz. We are told that Boaz is a man of noble character. He's a very generous man, and he's very generous to Ruth. He provided for her, and he prayed that the Lord would bless her, and instructed her men to let her glean so that she will have plenty. So then when Ruth came home, Naomi was shocked to see that she had so much food, and Naomi said, "Why have you got so much food?" And Ruth said, "Well, the man that I worked for is a man called Boaz." And Naomi was amazed, as he was one of Naomi's family relatives. In fact, he was a family redeemer. And a redeemer meant that he had a responsibility to care for any relatives, particularly who were widowed. Naomi encouraged her to stay close to this man, Boaz, because he was of the family, and she encouraged him to stay and work in his field. And then we move into chapter 3. Chapter 3 opens with Naomi and Ruth making a plan to get Boaz to notice her. So Ruth goes down to Boaz's farm and lies at his feet as he's asleep, and he wakes up surprised, and Ruth said to him quickly that, "I'm here just to ask if you will fulfill your role as a redeemer and marry her." Boaz was impressed by her loyalty and calls her a woman of noble character. But he did say there is another redeemer that who has the first right of redemption, and that he would go and speak to him to see if he can fulfill that. So Ruth goes back to Naomi, and again they're both excited and filled with hope. And then we move into chapter 4. So we've just read chapter 4, and we've read that Boaz is going up to the gate to speak to this other redeemer, but the other redeemer refused to commit to this deal once he found out that he had to marry Ruth, that was part of it. So they made an agreement that Boaz could redeem the family property and continue the name of Elimelech's family and marry Ruth. So the story concludes with kind of like a reversal from the start. Ruth began with Elimelech and the 2 sons dying, and it just being quite distressing, and no hope and misery when Naomi said her name was Mara, and now it ends. Here it ends with marriage. Now they have a new son, Obed. Ruth and Boaz had a new son, Obed, so there's birth in the family and hope. So it's lovely how the start of the book started off quite miserable and has ended very hopeful. We read there that then Ruth and Boaz had a son called Obed, and that brings us to the genealogy. Boaz and Ruth, who had Obed. Obed is actually the father of Jesse, who is the father of David, which ultimately leads us to the true Redeemer, David's greater son, Jesus, who came to us and restored and redeemed us from our brokenness. So it is such a beautiful story that points us towards Jesus. So from reading the book of Ruth, one thing I know I've noticed, and I know we've discussed this in our Bible study, is that you don't really hear God mentioned that much, his name. However, you do see him at work. You see how Ruth thought God was against her, but he was actually working in her life for good and turned it all around wonderfully, even though she thought he was against him. So there are wonderful things in this book, and I know we've really enjoyed studying it together. So we are going to head over to Zoom now and discuss this chapter 4, and I will have some questions over on Zoom. Okay, thank you for listening, and see you then. Bye bye.